Hello, welcome to today's video, which is going to be on the Mailed Flower, which was an event-exclusive weapon in the 3.5 Windbloom's Breath event. If you were playing during this time and managed to pick up a Mailed Flower, you might be wondering, who the heck am I supposed to use this on? Who is it good for? Who is it bad for? Who is it absolutely perfect for? We're gonna go over all of it today, including some theory crafting stuff, some abyss testing, etc, etc. But before we get into it, don't forget to join me live on twitch.tv/Meejin, M-E-E-J-I-I-N. When you're not on stream, you're missing out on moments just like this. Ito doesn't fit, Ito fits where he needs to fit. Anyway, without further ado, let's get into today's video. Okay, the Mailed Flower. Let's talk about it. At level 90, this weapon's going to give you 565 base attack and 110 elemental mastery. Now just a quick note that when I'm talking about this weapon in the video, I'm going to be referring to R5 because I assume most people have the Mailed Flower at R5. So just know that when I'm talking about it or comparing it to other weapons, I'm taking into account the R5 passive of the Mailed Flower. Speaking of the passive of this weapon is that within 8 seconds after the character's elemental skill hits an opponent or the character triggers an elemental reaction, their attack and elemental mastery will be increased by 24% and 96% respectively. So as an elemental mastery claimer, this is a pretty unique weapon. Really, the only other comparable one is going to be the Rainslasher. It also has an elemental mastery main stat, however its passive is more effective against enemies affected by Hydro or Electro. Now the only other elemental mastery claimer is going to be the Makhaira Aquamarine. I might have said that wrong. For the most part, I'm not going to be directly comparing the Mailed Flower to this weapon because it is not as easily accessible and readily available. Though the Rainslasher is also a banner weapon that you have to wish in order to get, it is always available. And that's why I feel like it's more of a direct comparison because I feel like most people have a Rainslasher or will get a Rainslasher at some point, whereas this weapon is definitely going to be harder to get and certainly harder to refine. We might do some theory crafting with it just to take a look at it, but for the most part, I think it's way more relevant to compare the Rainslasher to the Mailed Flower for most people. Let's just quickly go over kind of the differences between the Mailed Flower and the Rainslasher. So at level 90, the Rainslasher has 510 base attack and 165 EM. At R1, it increases damage against opponents affected by Hydro or Electro by 20%. At R2, this becomes 24%. At R3, 28%. At R4, 32%. And finally, R5, 36%. As I mentioned before, the Rainslasher is a banner exclusive weapon. However, it's not exclusive to the weapon banner. It is available on all the banners all the time. So with that being said, one of the main differences is of course that the Mailed Flower is a free-to-play friendly option, whereas the Rainslasher is a wishing not free-to-play option. Of course, because it was an event exclusive weapon, that means that the Mailed Flower is no longer available, whereas the Rainslasher is always available. Always. Of course, most people who played the event and got the event weapon will likely have it at R5, whereas with the Rainslasher, you're going to need to wish in order to get it R5. So generally speaking, the Rainslasher at high refinements is going to beat out the Mailed Flower in certain situations and certain comps. For example, Rainslasher would perform really, really well in a Vaporize comp where you're going to trigger the Vaporize reaction with your Pyro character, meaning that the enemy is affected by Hydro, which is how you would trigger the Rainslasher's passive. And it would also likely outperform the Mailed Flower in certain situations where you're not using that character's skill very often. In order to trigger the Mailed Flower's passive, you need to use a skill or trigger an elemental reaction. So if you are swapping off the character holding the Mailed Flower and seldom using their skill, then you're not going to get that bonus attack percentage or EM, which in turn could make it weaker than the Rainslasher. Again, it is dependent on your comps and what kind of teams you're going to be running, but that's just something to keep in mind. Alright, so let's talk about who this weapon is excellent on, who it's good on, who it's okay on, and who it's straight up bad on. So just a quick note, the Mailed Flower has no energy recharge stat on it at all, so just keep that in mind when you're choosing a character to put it on. Make sure to consider their energy needs and meet those requirements in the artifacts because you're not going to find it on the Mailed Flower, okay? Now, as far as I'm concerned, the Mailed Flower could really only be considered best in slot for Kaveh. The event happened right before he came out, so I think that they made this weapon with him in mind in order to give people a free-to-play option for him with some heckin' baby girl aesthetic. How I run my Kaveh and how a lot of people run their Kaveh is in a bloom team. Mailed Flower is going to be great in that kind of comp because you are using Kaveh's skill frequently, triggering reactions frequently, and really needing all that extra EM. So this is an excellent choice for him, and it makes him look super duper baby girl cute! Okay, so the next category characters are characters that I found the Mailed Flower is pretty good on. I've been testing all these characters out with the mailed flower, a little bit on stream, a little bit on my own time, and kind of getting an idea of how I feel about it on them. I will say that the performance of the mailed flower is going to vary greatly depending on what artifacts you're running on these characters, what comps you're putting them in. And I'm also going to mention that it's not going to be the best choice for any of these characters. Many 5-star options will outperform the milled flower, as well as certain 4-stars like Serpent Spine, especially at high refinements. But if you have it and you want to try it out, or you only have so many options available anyway, then it's absolutely a viable choice. All right, so the melt flower on a vape or melt Diluc. Now, vape and melt are not the only reactions you could try out with the melt flower, of course. It's just what I've personally been trying out with this weapon. In my vape Diluc team, the melt flower performed really well. I usually use the Black Cliff, but we tested it out against the Rainslasher as well. I'll talk about that more in the Theorycrafting section. But yeah, this is absolutely a viable option on Diluc. Now the next one's a little bit of a weirdo. EM Razor. What? Yes! It is possible, and it was actually pretty good. So I've been testing a full EM Razor in a Hyperbloom comp, and the results are kind of surprising. EM Razor did pretty well, actually. I was not disappointed. The only issue with EM Razor is that if you're used to physical Razor, you're gonna have to get used to a little bit of a different rotation style, having to refresh the dendrocores on the field, right, in order to trigger that Hyperbloom at all. So in that sense, it takes a little bit more finessing, I think, than physical Razor, but that's the story with any comp. So if you want to run EM Razor, it's definitely doable. Now, Chongers, Chongyun. I tested this a little on Chongyun, admittedly less than the other two characters, but overall, my kind of impression was that, of course, it does more damage than what I normally run on him, which is a sacrificial greatsword. But the problem is that I don't really run my Chong for like crazy reverse melt numbers. So because of that, I like to have a lot of energy on Chongyun. He doesn't have a very high burst cost to begin with, but even so, the double proc of the sac sword can help set up more reactions for my Benny. So where I'm sitting now with Mailed Flower and Chongyun is that I'm not sure it's worth it for me to sacrifice those comfortable rotations with all that extra energy for a little more personal damage on Chongyun. That's where I'm sitting with that. It is possible. Like, obviously you're going to do more damage when you have a little bit of EM on your Chong. Alright, so the next category of characters are characters that I imagine the Mailed Flower would be okay on, but I either A, don't have the character, or B, don't want to build the character just to test out the Mailed Flower. So I present these characters. Don't mind Candace, she's standing in for Dia, because girlfriends, happy Pride Month. But yeah, pretend Dia's here. Sorry, I don't have Dia yet. I'm sure I'll lose a 50-50 to her because I am the Archon of sadness and despair. You don't choose the life you live, you just live it. Anyway, Dia. Running this weapon on Dia is going to be completely dependent on what kind of team you're running her in. For example, I could see this weapon working pretty well in a Burgeon comp, where you want to stack as much EM as possible on the character triggering the reaction, because Burgeon is a transformative reaction. Meaning that it only scales on your level and your EM. I've said it a million times, but in case you've never seen any of my videos before, you don't know what a transformative reaction is, that's what it is. For other pyro-based comps, like a melt or a vape comp, for example, I imagine it would work similarly to how it performs on Diluc, in that you don't want a full EM build, but some EM will help your damage. Also similarly to Diluc, I imagine it would not perform as well as certain 5-star weapons, especially her best in slot, for example, Unforged, Wolf's Gravestone, but still a viable option, I imagine. Sayu also seems like a very viable holder of the Mailed Flower. As an animal character, she could always get use out of EM for swirls, and it has a fairly nice base attack, which will help with her heals. Dory, I could also see this working on Dory in a few different comps. For example, a Hyperbloom comp. I usually run Kuki Shinobu in my Hyperbloom comp, but I imagine you could slap as much EM as possible on Dory and use her in a very similar way. She's also a healer, so, you know, potato. Or you could also run maybe a partial EM Dory in, say, an Aggravate comp. So I could see this working on her as well. Not gonna build her to find out. Now, Jin Yan. Here's a questionable one. In fact, let me isolate her and make her feel like she's not part of the group. I am not a Jinyan expert, but from what I understand based on her kit, I think it would be a little difficult to get Mailed Flower to work on her. In theory, it should work the same way that it would work on Diluc or Dia, say in like a Burgeon comp. Stack as much EM as possible on your Jinyan to trigger the Burgeon reaction, and then bang, there's your damage. The problem with Jinyan is that she relies on her shield, which is her skill, in order to consistently apply pyro. Jinyan's shield scales off of her def. So if you're building her full EM, then you run the risk of breaking that shield pretty easily, especially because Burgeon also hurts your active character, right? Which would leave you with no way to trigger the reaction because your shield's gone. Xinyan does not have the strongest shield to begin with. In addition to that, Xinyan has to hit at least 2 enemies in order to pulse her shield. So if you're not hitting 2 enemies, if you're not building death on your shield, if you're burning yourself to death on top of all of it, it's a lot of elements working against her. I'm not saying it's not possible, especially if you try to incorporate some death in there, but when I was thinking it over, it just seemed like a little bit of a trickier situation in my mind. At the end of the day, I think it's possible. Don't think it's going to be absolutely amazing. Okay, so who is this weapon bad on? The only character I'm going to go into detail on this is Beidou. With Beidou, you might be thinking, if I want to use Beidou in certain reaction comps, why wouldn't I want a little EM or a lot of EM to make those reactions stronger? Let me tell you why. EM is generally not a great way to build your Beidou because her talents have such high multipliers. Beidou's talents scale off her attack and a little bit off her HP, but that's not really that important. So when she's built using that more attack crit based build, her damage is a lot higher. In addition, she's just straight up not a good option in triggering certain reactions. I'm looking at you, Hyper Bloom. Beidou's burst does not do area of effect damage. It jumps from one enemy to the other. So if you have a Dendro Core lying on the field, Beidou's ult is not going to trigger that. So if you were thinking, pure EM build so I can do Hyper Bloom Beidou, it's not going to be a great choice. I'm not saying that you can't run Beidou in these kind of comps. You can, of course. I'm just saying that the traditional attack and crit build is what's going to be best on her more than anything else. You can run her in a ton of different reaction comps. Just don't change her build around. Pretend that this empty void is Eula. It might as well be. Where is she? Meltflower would be bad on these characters. I don't think I need to go into why. It would be bad. That is all. All right, let's do some theory crafting. Again, everyone has different artifacts, everyone has different characters that they're working with. If you want to plug in your own numbers in a theory crafter, please do so. It's a lot of fun. A great way to spend an afternoon. You don't need friends, you don't need family. You just need theory crafting. Here's my current Kaveh build. We've got the mailed flower on him, and we want to compare it to the Rainslasher. So as you can see, worse all across the board, but this is without the passive, so let's quickly check if we click the passive. So we're actually gaining damage across the board, except for in the transformative reactions. And again, since I run my Kaveh for his blooms, this is kind of where my focus is. But even so, these damage differences are so minimal, like what, 166? I mean, okay, you know? It's minimal enough for me to completely disregard it, even if it was showing me that Rainslasher did more damage, because baby girl? Are we forgetting that? The most important part of Kaveh's kit, the baby girl part. So catch me never running Rainslasher on Kaveh, but let's compare it to this guy, Makhaira. Let's do R1 because that's more realistic for people. So at R1, lower across the board as well, except for just some basic attack stuff that it gives you. What about R5? So similar to Rainslasher, we got more damage over here, but less damage overall in transformative reactions. So interesting. Hello, it is me editing Meej. I realized when I did the Diluc theory crafting that I had the wrong weapon on, so that doesn't help much. So I fixed it all up here. He is now holding the mailed flower so that we can compare the mailed flower to other weapons. So let's do some theory crafting. So over here we have the Rainslasher at R5 that we're going to compare to. We'll click the passive on as if the enemy is affected by Hydro or Electro. Okay, so as you can see here, the theory crafting build is telling us that the Rainslasher will do better damage for Diluc in all of these areas, but not in the transformative reactions area. That's pretty interesting. Let's turn on the Vaporize just to see. So same thing, not as much damage over here in transformative. Melt, I assume, would also be the same. Yep. Looks that way. So let's put no reactions and then click off this button. The enemy is not affected by Hydro or Electro, and suddenly the Rainslasher becomes a worse option. However, if I put this back on and we look at the damage difference, it's not really terribly huge. Again, this is also R5 Rainslasher, so if you did not have R5 Rainslasher and you had the Melt Flower, then it might just be the better choice for you on this kind of build. Finally, let's compare it to a 5-star weapon, Wolf's Gravestone, which is Diluc's general best in slot. Not R5, that's wild. No reactions just for now. As you can see, big damage increase across the board except for in the transformative reactions area, which makes sense. It becomes worse when we turn on the Vaporize reaction. I assume it would be the same if we turned on the Melt. Yep, but that makes sense because some EM is useful here, in which case what I'd recommend is switching to an EM Sans. Boop. There you go. But that just goes to show you that, you know, you have to kind of work with what you have. And if you do have a Wolf's Gravestone, I would recommend running an EM Sans on your Diluc because this weapon has attack as its secondary stat. So you really don't need to run an additional attack sands on top of everything. So yeah, playing around with stuff like that's really fun. All right, back to non-editing Niche. Finally, Razor. So Razor has R5 Serpent Spine, and he's on a physical build right now. So I've changed all of these theory-crafted artifacts to Elemental Mastery on a gilded set for a hypothetical Hyperbloom build on Razor. So obviously, worst across the board, except for in the transformative reactions area. Makes sense, we're built on EM now. That's how that works. But as you can see, the main source of Razor's damage as a physical DPS, we're losing a lot over here, right? Like this is a significant amount of damage, but you're gaining a lot over here, especially in Hyperbloom, which is what I'd be running him on. Let's click this aggravate button just to see as well. So obviously the physical stuff still staying very much similar, but the skill, which of course applies electro, is going to be slightly better with the aggravate stuff applied. I mean, this should not be surprising, right? This is exactly what you would expect to see, but it's just fun to compare these kinds of builds. I mean, physical Razor and Hyperbloom Razor are obviously two very different Razors. But it just goes to show you that you lose out on one area, but you can really gain in another. But at the end of the day, you can see that this is quite a big damage increase, and worth a try if you're curious about it. If not to test numbers, then just for fun. Okay, so let's do some Spiral Abyss stuff with a few characters holding the mailed flower. We'll go into floor 12, but probably only the first floor because, I don't know if you noticed, floor 12 is kind of brutal right now, and I hate the second part of the first chamber. So we're just gonna stay in the first part. We'll do a little bloom showcase. You can see the potential, and then we'll pop on out of there, get another character, bada bing, bada boom. All right, so here is the Kaveh build. We have just over 1,000 EM, which is really nice for a bloom comp. The rest of this doesn't really matter other than his ER, which is too low for my taste. You'll notice that when we go in the Abyss, but you know, I'm still working on the artifacts. It is what it is for now. Artifact-wise, we are running full Paradise Lost set, EM, EM, EM for the stats at the top. So that's the Kaveh build. Let's head on into Abyss. I hate when they put Whopper Flowers in Abyss. Literally the worst. Stop! So as you can see, pretty nice bloom damage. Like I said, the ER is not so great, and we're not ulting as much as we should be, but you know. Alright, so yeah, as you can see, some really nice bloom damage from the Kaveh team. I think this team's really fun and I do enjoy it. Wouldn't be my choice for 36 starring, especially this round in Abyss, but a fun little option. Alright, here's the Diluc with the mailed flower. 176 EM, pretty much all of it coming from the mailed flower. 85.2 crit rate, 129.3 crit damage. Obviously, we are sacrificing a little bit here in order to run an EM weapon. I had Blackcliff on him before, so that's where a big chunk of his crit damage came from. Keeping him on Crimson Witch because we're going to do a vape comp, so we don't need full EM for that. Attack Sands to make up for the lack of attack we have going on. Pyro Damage Goblet, and a crit rate circlet. So this is the Diluc build. Let's head on into Abyss. Alright, let's set everything up. I'm gonna do Benny ult first. So let's do an ult, let's do a Kazu. A little bit of Kazu skill, Xingqiu ult so we can get them wet, and then let's hit them with the ult. 82k, so that's pretty nice. Mind you, we are standing in the Benny ult. But yeah, even without the Benny ult, 30k vapes, that's pretty good. Oh, there's one more. Oh, she's hiding. Ah! 6k but wouldn't crit, 19k. Yeah, so as you can see, pretty nice on the Diluc as well. So there you had it on the Diluc. Like I said before, not going to be his best in slot option, especially if you have 5 stars to pick from, but it's also not a bad option. I think people tend to really overlook Elemental Mastery when it comes to characters that you wouldn't build on full EM. So that was that on Diluc. Look how pleased he was with that trial. This is the face of pure joy and delight. Alright, so here we are with Hyperbloom Razor. Basically, what I did was stole Kaveh's artifacts, all of them, and gave him the mailed flower. So that is the build for Hyperbloom Razor that I'm gonna do. Sadly, because we took Kaveh's artifacts, we're still lacking in the ER department. What are you gonna do? We're seeing at 892 EM, which is pretty nice. So let's take this into Abyss. Okay, so setting up Hyperbloom Razor is a little more difficult than setting up Physical Razor. Maybe I'm just not used to it yet. It just can be a little problematic if you don't have those cores out on the field and you don't refresh them, because like, as you can see see right now, we're doing a lot of electro charge, which is not amazing for the build we have on right now. So you have to kind of like keep an eye on that and refresh all your cores on the field, which is also not ideal because then you're not getting as much energy as you need to refresh his ult, which is how he's going to be attacking very fast. It's all kind of a bunch of stuff working against you. Okay, let's get a few cores on the field and we'll do a little boop. 31k as you can see right there. That's pretty good. I'm gonna stab it. No! Oh, they honed in. Nice, we like to see that. So yeah, as you can see, like in the situation right now, there's no dendro core production on the field. So that's where you're gonna have to switch out a Razor a little early just to make things work a little bit. And then you have a bunch of cores in the field like this. Now's a good time to kind of go for it. Yeah, so quite nice Hyper Bloom damage when you can get it. So Razor Hyper Bloom, as you saw, a little surprising, right? Not that bad. Like I said, it's a little awkward, especially if you're used to physical Razor, but it's not a bad build. And if you like Razor and you want different ways to play him, like this is definitely a viable option. Just a different and fun way to play Razor if you're looking to try it. All right, so to wrap it up, is the Mailed Flower worth building if you happen to pick it up? It really depends. I would say if you want to build and use Kaveh, particularly in a Bloom comp, then yes, the Mailed Flower is absolutely worth building. But for every other character, it's pretty dependent on what team you're running and how many weapons you already have available to you. Personally, it seems to me that this weapon is more useful for possibly newer players because they might have fewer choices to begin with. If you're deep endgame like me, then it's likely you already have like an R5 Rainslasher or 2 or 3. I am on my 3rd refinements of the Rainslasher, as in I have 2 R5s and I am working on the 3rd. So I'm drowning in Elemental Mastery weapons over here. I also have that weapon banner exclusive one, the Mycara. Hey, Macarena, I got that one too. So maybe if I was someone who was crazy and didn't want Kaveh and didn't pull for Kaveh, can't imagine, then yeah, I could very much see not building the Mailed Flower because I already have other options that are so close and comparable. What's the point? But for a newer player who does not have as many options, I could see this being pretty valuable for you. It's good on quite a few characters that you might not even think about. Like we discussed, EM Razor, Diluc, whom I think most people don't even think about using a lot of EM on, which is a mistake, by the way. Do some EM. So it's definitely viable in a lot of different builds. It's just up to you who you're gonna run them with, how you're gonna do your rotations, all that jazz. At the end of the day, I'll say that this is absolutely worth building if you need an EM type weapon like this. For sure, it's a great choice and viable on a lot of different characters. That's going to do it for me for today's video. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed. Let me know if you are continuing to enjoy the weapon reviews, and if you have any weapons that you would like to see reviewed, please tell me in the comment section below. Feel free to join me live on twitch.tv/Meijin, MEIJIN. We do a lot of the testing there live on stream, so you can give advice, feedback, your own personal experience. It's all helpful. But that about does it for me today. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope you enjoyed today's video, and I hope to see you in the next one. Oh, someone's here, a little visitor. Who's that guy? Hey! Everyone come here, everyone be friends, everyone wanna be together till the very end. But that I doubt. I doubt. I doubt in my mind. Okay, so let's do some spiral. Oh my gosh, the sun right in my eyes. Run into the corner's the place to be.